Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the Munduruku, the fight to defend the heart of the Amazon project that was a collaboration between Greenpeace, who I work for, and Alchemy VR, you may have come across, and a company called The who do multi-sensory VR storytelling. And before anyone argues with me, I know technically this is a 360 video project and not VR. However, arguably because of the multi-sensory elements, you could argue maybe it was creating a virtual kind of a reality, but we'll come a bit more to that later on. So yeah, that's in the wrong place, but there we go. So I kind of like to start with two quotes. One is from Ben Metcalfe, who is one of the founders of Greenpeace, and these are two of the kind of principles that guide a lot of the work that Greenpeace does. One is around the concept of bearing witness, which is one of our kind of core principles, the idea that once you've witnessed an injustice, you can't claim ignorance as a defense for inaction. You make a choice of whether to act or not, and that's something that Greenpeace holds very dearly in all of our work. We present people with information, we show them places, and we give them a choice to act to solve one of those problems or to try and make that situation better. The other one is from Maya Angelou, which again is a kind of direction that we've gone a lot more recently with our work, which is less about trying to kind of bombard people with information, but more trying to communicate about environmental crises in a way that really makes people feel that issue, not just kind of understand the logic of it, but really have a kind of a very powerful response to it. And so those are two of the kind of key principles that, that led this project. So this was part of our Save the Heart of the Amazon campaign that we ran primarily in 2016, globally and particularly in the UK. It's been running in Brazil, Greenpeace Brazil, for many, many years and continues right now. This was a project about working with the Munduruku indigenous people in the Amazon and their struggle against particularly hydroelectric dam building on a place called the Tapajós River, which is the last undammed river in the whole of the Amazon rainforest. So this was a work with them to try and kind of protect their home, basically, which was going to be flooded. But we had a particular challenge, which is that in Brazil particularly, where we really needed a lot of that change to happen, there's a very polarizing perception of indigenous land rights. It's a very controversial topic in a lot of places in Brazil. It's also, in our experience, very difficult to engage people with indigenous rights struggles compared to, you know, save the orangutan or save the polar bear or whatever. People respond to that a lot more. And the other thing is that the Munduruku tell powerful stories, that as many indigenous cultures, they have an oral tradition, and they are natural storytellers, and we found that social media wasn't the best way of communicating what they were really trying to say. So we wanted to find a new way of kind of allowing them to tell their story that we hoped would tackle this challenge of the perception of indigenous people. We came across some research from the Virtual Human Interaction Lab at Stanford University, which is fascinating. Indicates that actually vivid, immersive environments can actually engage people much deeper, on a much deeper level, particularly with environmental messages. So that was something that we started talking about a lot. This is way back in 2015. We actually started this project 2 years before we launched it. And then I met these two companies. Again, one of the images is not working there, but that's fine. The Feelies and Alchemy VR. And we started kind of throwing a few of these ideas around what this project might look like. We knew right from the beginning we wanted to make it multi-sensory, not just audio-visual. And so right from the very beginning, the Feelies got on board and starting to develop that narrative. And then again, working with Alchemy VR, who are part of Atlantic Productions and really are, you know, experts in natural history filmmaking. And when you're going somewhere like the middle of the Amazon rainforest, you want to work with people who know how to work in that sort of environment. Not everyone can spend a whole day filming in 38 degrees and 90% humidity. So what we created was Munduruku, a multi-sensory VR experience and it transports people to the heart of the Amazon rainforest, to the Tapajos River. And this was really about, as my colleague puts it, removing the invisibility of indigenous people. When these big industrial projects come into these areas, they ignore indigenous rights, they ignore the people who are there, they just move them out and get on with it. So this was about enabling the Munduruku to stand up and say, we are here, you cannot ignore us. So how do you make multi-sensory stories? And this is the bit that I would usually bring Grace Boyle along to talk about. She runs the Feely. She's much better at doing it than I am, but hopefully I can represent some of that. So we started very standard, the way you would with any film, storyboarding, writing a script, those sorts of things. There's some of the very early storyboards of different scenes that we wanted to include. But then the difference, and these are excerpts from the script, is that whilst writing the script, we also included narrative elements talking about the emotions we wanted people to feel, some of the sensory elements that we wanted to include. So right from the beginning, the whole piece was told not just audio-visually, but through touch, through smell, through balance, orientation, temperature. Grace often says that actually it's thought people, we think of 5 senses, and apparently we actually have 33 different senses that you can play with at different times to kind of create different feelings. So that was part of the pre-production. When we came to filming, a big part of it was working with the Munduruku so that they understood what we were trying to do. They were, surprisingly enough, familiar with virtual reality, despite living in a very remote part of the Amazon rainforest. But we took along headsets and we worked with them to sort of develop the scenes and to work out how they would be filmed. They had a very clear idea of the way they wanted to present themselves, and so we'd sit down and essentially have a production meeting with them every day, discuss what we were going to film, and they would feed in. It was very much a kind of a collaboration, almost a kind of co-direction from them. And this is James Manistee, the director. So yeah, we shot with the Nokia Ozo, which is not designed to be used in the Amazon rainforest. It's a fantastic camera, but this particular scene, it was about 41 degrees, and it overheated and didn't work. I think the core temperature was about 70-something in the camera, but what we ended up doing, this is James's idea, was very quickly taking the camera, putting it in a pelly case and covering it with those instant ice packs for sports injuries, cool it down, and then we were able to shoot again. So yeah, it was a very interesting, a very difficult experience filming in those kind of conditions. I think probably the camera technology has moved on somewhat since then. The other problem is at that time, the Nokia Ozo, you could only edit or back up or review the footage on a Mac Pro. So we basically built a mini edit suite in a small hut in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. And we had about 3 hours of power from a small generator every evening to get everything we possibly could done. And I mean, this is literally a hut in the middle of the rainforest. And we had to kind of cover it with tarps when it was raining, and it was a bit of a nightmare. There's bugs everywhere. But we kind of managed to get through it. But other particular challenges was when you turn up to film a scene where you're going to mount a camera in the boat, and the boat starts the day fully submerged in the water and filled with leaves, and they spend 20 minutes digging it out. You then have to make the decision, are you going to put your 60,000-pound camera in a boat that started its day underwater? So again, reacting very, very quickly to that. But this was about the Munduruku, and they were saying, well, this is how we fish, so this is what you've got to film. This is James Aldred, the DOP, and he spent 2 days basically up the top of this 30-meter kapok tree, rigging this camera, and we were able to hoist it up and drop it down to kind of create this feeling of moving up and coming down the tree, falling as if the tree was being cut down. And again, that moment of tension, that moment of kind of drama. And then working with the Feelies, this is Grace, and she brought a whole load of equipment for things like recording, she used contact microphones to record vibration. She took light, humidity, and temperature readings so that every part of the experience is based on real location data. They were mapping, kind of creating a sensory map of Saaremaa, which is the name of the village that we were in. Again, this is the wind speed. At the top, you can see a kind of very gentle, cool breeze, and at the bottom, it's more of a kind of storm. This was just before a very heavy downpour. So again, using these elements narratively within the film to create different emotional moments, very similar to how you would use soundtrack. One of the particular challenges, because obviously we wanted to create smell as well, is how do you record smell? And there is a technology that you can use called gas chromatography mass spectrometry. It's incredibly expensive. It can detect minuscule amounts of certain chemicals in the air. But we couldn't afford that. It uses huge, great big machines. So we had this. This is Najib. He is a classically trained perfumer, and he has an incredible sense of smell. He can walk into somewhere as complex an environment as the Amazon rainforest and work out exactly within about half an hour how to recreate that smell from various different essential oils. It's quite an incredible talent. This is one of his recipes. And so he wrote walking around a manioc field whilst they were harvesting. He was talking about the various different smells that were there, and it's very, very complex. There's obviously the fresh kind of citrusy smell of the manioc itself, but also rotten fruit, because they grow a lot of different crops in the area at different times of year, and they burn the ground in between the harvests to kind of put nutrients back into the soil. So it's a very, very complex recipe. You can see the various different ingredients. He wrote that down standing in the field, came back to the UK, made the perfume. We took it to a Brazilian who, from very near the Amazon, took one smell and just said, yep, that's right, which is quite incredible. Some of them took a lot longer. There's about 6 perfumes in the whole piece. So again, how did we use them? So they created an olfactory narrative. So you can see the kind of traditional 3-act story arc, you know, the rising action and the moments of setback and challenge, and then the kind of climactic finish. And these are all different perfumes that were used at different times to create different emotions, to get different responses. And some of them are nice, some of them are really not nice. This one, Grace discovered that she can't even be in the same room as this smell because it makes her want to throw up. The manioc and the jungle perfumes, lots of people have come to me and said, oh, can I buy some of that? I'd like to wear it. So they vary differently about how you respond to them, but they create a story very similarly to a soundtrack. So how do you display it? How do you create that experience? And this was our first prototype. It looks a bit like a kind of weird device out of, you know, Blade Runner or something. But we wanted to create these pods that people would sit in, and you would have all these different elements around. This is the final kind of, what do they call it, CAD diagram of what the pod eventually ended up looking like. And this is the kind of inside view. So what you've got here is various different pieces. So you've got heat lamps, fans, the perfumes, and a chair in the middle with a sub pack on to create that kind of rumble effect. So that was using the contact recordings, the contact microphone recordings from underwater in the river, and there's a scene where they dance in a circle. There's a very important part of Munduruku tradition is dancing. And so we recorded their kind of stamping feet as they were dancing around, and played that back, again, narratively through the sub-pack. So this is what the pod looks like inside. And again, the wind and the heat was mapped. We worked with a company called Bales and Light, who actually are lighting engineers, but were able to create the heat lamp and wind tracks using DMX systems to create a replica of the wind that was recorded there, the temperatures that were recorded there. It's not 100%, obviously. It's a kind of, they talk about it in the same way that, you know, a landscape painter doesn't create an exact image of something. It's similar with this. It's an interpretation. But it's based on real data collected there. And this was the exhibition that we ran in Brazil. As I said at the start, really this was about opinion change in Brazil, changing public perceptions. So we had 5 of these pods. It's actually a time lapse, which is why it looks transparent. They're not actually transparent. In an exhibition in Sao Paulo that we ran for a month. You can see the pods here, and inside each pod with the participant is a sensory technician, and so some of this was automated, some of it necessarily was delivered by hand. And that's actually an important part of it. It's part experience for the person and part performance on the part of the sensory technician. There are ways of delivering some of these different sensory elements automatically, but not with the same level of accuracy and sort of timing as if you do it by hand. But it wasn't just the pods. Again, this was thinking about the experience, and the Feelies really are experience designers. They work multisensorially, but their background is in experience design. So this was an exhibition, and this is the floor of where it was. And one of the ideas we had right from the beginning, right from the start of this project, was we wanted people to go on a journey to transport themselves from wherever it was they started into the Amazon forest. We didn't want it to just be, right, go and sit in this thing and put a headset on. We wanted them to have this kind of journey and to understanding and to start to shift them into a slightly different frame of mind, a slightly different space. So the idea was they would enter, they would be led by the master of ceremonies, would be led around, introduced to the Munduruku. We had images and videos up on the wall. They'd be introduced to who they are, and then eventually led into the pod and introduced to their sensory technician. They would go through the experience afterwards. The experience is about 15-20 minutes long. Afterwards, we had this space here designed to look like what's called an oka, an indigenous hut. And that would be a space for them to sit and reflect on what they'd seen. We found that this was a very affecting and emotional experience, and a lot of people want to actually sit down and have a conversation, or sometimes just sit and have a quiet moment afterwards. Sometimes they would go away straight away, and they'd come back 20 minutes later and say, I need to talk to you about this now. And so we created a space for them to do that. So yeah, that was the exhibition, and we had, I think, about 2,000 people come through there over the course of a month. We also did the European premiere at Sheffield Dockfest. So this is up in the Millennium Gallery in Sheffield. We took it to Glastonbury Festival. You can see here, weirdly, in the press tent. I'm not sure why they put us in the press tent, but they did. And that was great. And then, yeah, Bertie and Samantha took it up to Future Play in Edinburgh. And again, ran it there during the Edinburgh Festival. This was at Raindance at the Genesis Cinema. We had it running in the foyer there over Raindance Film Festival. And then finally, we took it to Future Storytelling in New York, which was a mission to get it working at. But the crucial issue, did it make a difference? Did actually anything change? We wanted to change public perception. And the answer is, yeah, it looks like it. That was the challenge, if you remember. That was what we set out to try and deal with. And it appears, yes, it may have actually done something. We don't know this. This is not rigorously kind of academic surveying data. But we did ask people, and we've surveyed quite a number of people who've been through the experience, nearly 1,000. And these were the results, that 83% of people said that their knowledge about the Amazon had changed. 81% agreed that their perception of indigenous rights had changed. And crucially, 86% agreed that they believed they could be an ally to indigenous people. And that was really what we were going for. It wasn't about the number of people that sign a petition or the number of people that give a donation. Those things are very important to campaigning work. But this was really trying to change people's opinions. And this, I thought, would just be interesting for people in making VR experiences. This was some other questions that we asked. They didn't know how long the experience lasted. Most people from this data seemed to not have a clue how long it was. And pretty much everyone wanted it to be a lot longer. So yeah, that's just a nice picture of the team with the Munduruku. This is the chief holding the camera at the front there. And then finally, a little sneak peek at what we've got coming up next. Right now, one of our ships, the Arctic Sunrise, is down in Antarctica, diving in a place called the Weddell Sea, which is somewhere that no one has ever dived to the seabed before. So hopefully, we've got some 360 cameras down there. We will have something out later in the year. Thank you very much.